Hey everyone, Jeff McErlain here, and today I want to talk about the 10 most influential guitar records from the 1980s. Now, of course, these are my decisions or my choices, which may be very different from what was influential to you. But I think it's a pretty good list of some of the great guitar records from that decade, which was a part of my really formative years of learning how to play guitar. First up is Stevie Ray Vaughan and Double Trouble, Texas Flood. Now, the record was recorded in 3 days at Jackson Browne's studio in California. Chris Layton on drums, Tommy Shannon on bass, and of course Stevie Ray Vaughan on guitar. His influence since that point in time in the guitar world cannot obviously be overstated. He is one of the great guitar players of all time. That tone, that feel, that sound, and everything. But the most amazing thing to me was this is when MTV was in its infancy, and Stevie Ray Vaughan was getting tons of airplay on MTV. So think about this, a blues record, straight on blues record with hits. So what a different time it was in the 1980s, where guitar records could be heard on the radio, right? I miss those days, I have to say. All right, so of course, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Double Trouble, Texas Flood. Next up for me is Van Halen's 1984. Now, Van Halen had obviously put out some records in the 80s, but for me, it's when 1984 really, they hit it for me as a band. I love the other stuff, but some about 1984, once again, maybe it had something to do with the MTV stuff, with the Hot for Teacher video and the Jump video. And also, I was starting to get to a point in my guitar playing where I was kind of getting into being able to play some of this stuff. So that was a big thing for me. It's also the last great Van Halen record, in my mind, of the classic lineup featuring David Lee Roth, with tunes like Drop Dead Legs, Hot for Teacher, Jump, Top Jimmy, House of Pain, all those tunes. Great record. And Eddie, before he kind of switched when Sammy Hagar joined the band. He changed his style. He progressed in a different way. But this is the end, sort of that period that I love the most. And I think most Van Halen fans really favor this era. So 1984 by Van Halen. Coming in at number 8 is Blizzard of Oz by Ozzy Osbourne, of course featuring Randy Rhoads on guitar. It was one of the records that, you know what I'm talking about, when you think the record is written just for you, like it's your music. Right? So the first time I heard Mr. Crowley, which was the first cut I remember hearing from the record, I was a Sabbath fan, but this was just different. I heard Mr. Crowley, I remember having my Walkman on and my cassette player, and my friend had made me a cassette copy of the record, and he put the albums in the wrong order. So the first song was actually Mr. Crowley as opposed to I Don't Know. And I just remember thinking, this is the coolest thing I've ever heard. And to this day, I still think it's some of the coolest stuff I've ever heard. Standout tracks, of course, are going to be Crazy Train, Mr. Crowley. Well, they're all kind of standout tracks if you ask me. And Revelation, love that one. Love Diary of a Madman as well, too, but Blizzard of Oz was the one that really changed the course of my guitar playing for quite some time. So, Blizzard of Oz, great record. I do have to give some credit, of course, to J.K. Lee. I love those records. I love his guitar playing. I might even say he is more influential on me as a guitar player than Randy Rhoads was. But Randy Rhoads set the course for me as a guitar player in the early part of the 80s. So, there you go. At number 7, I have Jeff Beck's Guitar Shop. This one was a tough one for me to decide between this and There and Back, so I'll say There and Back as well. But Guitar Shop, because this is where Jeff Beck took that next step, and throughout his career he's always continuously progressing with the Jeff Beck group way back in the 60s with Rod Stewart, then the solo Jeff Beck group, and then the solo records like Wired and Blow by Blow and all those things. He kept on getting better and better and changing the style and refining it. I feel like when Guitar Shop came out, he really got into this newer thing where he's using the bar to create melodies with great tunes like Where Were You and Big Block, and just I don't want to say he came into his own, because that's obviously not true. He was his own in the 60s, where he became this other level for me, where his playing just went through the roof and has continued to since then. I also want to say, even though it's not from the 80s at all, I love the Emotion and Commotion record by Jeff Beck. I think it's some of his finest guitar playing. But for me, Jeff Beck's Guitar Shop, I got really heavily into that record and started using the bar way too much and all those things. So what a spectacular record. Number 6 is Alan Haldsworth's IOU, his second solo record, actually. This is Gary Husband on drums, Paul Carmichael on bass, and Paul Williams on vocals. And this was the record, I remember hearing it, I think I got it because a Guitar Player magazine mentioned it, and I put it on, I had no idea what I was listening to. I had never heard anything like it before, And I still kind of really haven't. This is where he seemed like he came from another planet. Like, what is he doing? He's the guitar players that I can understand what's going on. Haldsworth is still one of those guys, like, he's just from another planet, and I just love him for being Alan Haldsworth. The standout tracks for me in this record are Letters of Marque and Shallow Sea. And this is the record that really got Eddie Van Halen in his corner, and Eddie produced or got him, Ted Templeton, to produce the Road Games record. So, Alan Haldsworth, IOU. Now, number 5, I'm gonna do 2. I have to, because it's hard for me. I have to address Steve Vai, because Steve Vai in the 80s really was revolutionary. Another guitar player came out of the blue and just blew everybody's mind. Now, here's a little controversial pick for me for Steve Vai, and it is the Public Image Limited record called Album, or it was cassette or CD, depending how you bought it. Public Image Limited was the band that Johnny Rotten, now going by Johnny Lydon, started after the Sex Pistols. This record is great. If you do not know this record and you're a guitar fan, I think it's Steve Vai, in my opinion, at his finest. Apparently, he only had 2 days to record on it, and some of the tracks have Ginger Baker on drums, or Tony Williams on drums, and Bill Laswell on bass. Some really amazing stuff, great tunes. Steve Vai not playing music that you'd normally associate with Steve Vai. He was in Alcatraz at the time, so this is right before all the David Lee Roth stuff. So it's just him sounding like he's improvising, just laying stuff down super raw. Sounds like he's just plugged into a Marshall with his, I think it was probably the green guitar at the time. He talks about having the record done in 2 days and just really kind of blowing through the stuff. The standout tracks for me are FFF, Rise, which was actually like an alternative rock hit. Great tune. And there's a reissue of the record where they remix some of the stuff, and then Vai is actually brought to the forefront a little more in a really great way. The last song on the record is called Ease, and Vai takes what he says was an improvised solo at the end, and it sounds like it. It's an extended solo, and I think it's him at some of his most inspired guitar playing. He's just going for it, and it's freaking amazing. So, Public Image Limited, Album, and that's got Steve Vai on it. Coming in at number 5 is Michael Schenker's first solo record called The Michael Schenker Group. It's the one where he's sitting in this, what looks like a dentist chair. This record, I can't express the amount, the influence that he has on me as a guitar player. I think he is one of the greatest rock guitar players ever. His mixture of melodicism, phrasing, vibrato, tone. He can rip, but at the same time he can play beautifully melodic solos, always with a ton of vibe. And these records are great. It's produced by Roger Glover of Deep Purple and has Simon Phillips on drums, Gary Barden singing. The standout tracks from me are Into the Arena, that great instrumental, Looking Out for Nowhere, Lost Horizons, Armed and Ready, Feels Like a Good Thing. The whole record. If you're not familiar with the record, definitely check him out. He's one of those guys that I can say I can really trace back a lot of the things I do on the guitar to Michael Schenker. At number 4, we have Eric Johnson's Tones, and this came out in 1986. Nobody sounded like Eric Johnson. He was one of those guys like Haldsworth in a different way. He came out and was like, what is this guy doing? This is spectacular. The tones on the record, aptly named, of course. The songwriting, his chord work, his lead playing, his technique, all of it really just blew my mind, and obviously countless other guitar players as well, because he is definitely one of the most influential guitar players in the last 40 years. Joe Bonamassa cites him as a major influence. I cite him as a major influence. Most of my friends do, because he's just that great. The standout tracks on this record, to me, are going to be Soulful Terrain and Zap. And you've got Tommy Taylor on drums and Roscoe Beck on bass. It's great stuff. And it's the same band that did Avia Musicom, which came out in the 90s, so that's why that record is not on this list. I would have to say those 2 records really changed the way I played guitar. And also his instructional video from back then in the early 90s, that I think changed the way a lot of guitar players played guitar. So Eric Johnson, Tones. I will add that I've had some opportunity to hang out with Eric Johnson and got coffee a few times in New York City, and he is also the nicest guy you'd want to meet. Coming in at number 3 is Mike Stern's Upside Downside. What I love about this record, being a New Yorker, is it's a record that came out of New York. It sounds like a New York jazz record from the 80s. What I love about Mike Stern is the songwriting on this record is amazing. It was produced by the late Hiram Bullock. It has Jaco Pastorius on bass, David Sanborn on saxophone, has Dave Weckl on drums, Steve Jordan on drums, and I think there's one more person. I gotta check my list. And Bob Berg on sax. So amazing lineup of people. So Upside Downside. When I was at Berkeley, this was one of those records that I was on constant play in my room and lots of other people's room. What I learned from Mike was and I had the good fortune of studying with Mike, is learning to incorporate more jazzy ideas into my guitar playing. So he really got me more into jazz, because I'd go see him play at the 55 bar and hear him play standards, but he had his own take on it that I really loved. It was more modern, and he can rip, and I was just totally into it at the time, and it was great, and I still love him, of course. And he's also a sweetheart of a guy. The thing that, say, like compared to him and Alan Haldsworth, was such from another planet that I loved it, but trying to play it was almost impossible, and still is. And when I listen to Mike Stern, and as crazy and great as he is, I understand what's going on more, because his approach note ideas and having worked with him really opened up lots of doors to me and really expanded my ears. So Upside Downside by Mike Stern, spectacular record. Favorite tune on there is probably got to be Upside Downside, 2 tunes, and Mood Swings. The tune Mood Swings is amazing. Check that one out. Coming in at number 2 is Robben Ford's Talk to Your Daughter. It came out in 1988 and changed the way I viewed guitar, much like Mike Stern did a little earlier. And I know a lot of guitar players who feel the same way as I do. I am also fortunate, as many of you know, to continue now to work with Robben Ford and done records and tours with him and consider him a great friend. But this was all long before that. This is, one of the most influential blues rock guitar players with a jazz element. So what I really loved about him was at times Mike Stern got too jazzy for me, but Robben just seemed to just have it just right. That blues element, the phrasing, the tone, using the dumble, hadn't heard that kind of guitar tone before. Now, Robben had records out with the Yellow Jackets, but this was the one that I think really kind of took the world by storm in the guitar community. Tunes, Help the Poor, chord playing on that is great, it's comping. Ain't Got Nothing But the Blues, same thing. That was one of the first tunes that I learned how to navigate some chord changes by learning his solos and going, man, I think I can kind of do this. And so, because it wasn't too jazzy, it was this great cross of jazz and blues and rock. And of course, Talk to Your Daughter, the title track of the record. The record totally holds up, so Robben Ford's Talk to Your Daughter. Coming in at number 1, Yngwie J. Malmsteen's Rising Force. This is the first Yngwie solo record. I had his Alcatraz stuff. I had his demo that he did for Mike Varney over at Guitar Player magazine. This record came out and absolutely blew my mind. To this day, I love this record. Now you may say, hey Jeff, you got all these guys, you got like Eric Johnson and Mike Stern and Robben Ford and Yngwie. Yes, Yngwie. Yngwie taught me so much about playing guitar. One thing that he taught me about was tone. His tone is spectacular, especially in his early records. His vibrato is unbelievable. His control over the instrument. His technique, of course, right? Absolutely. So, do I play like Yngwie? No, but I can trace a lot of things back to him, and the technique I have now on the instrument, I owe largely to Yngwie, because I was trying to figure out how to play the stuff he was doing very unsuccessfully, but as a result, I developed economy picking. I learned how to sweep pick. I learned how to play arpeggios. I started listening to classical music. I started digging into Paganini and Bach and learning those pieces. I started to understand music theory more. And this was about 1983, I think it came out. I forgot to write that in my notes, but early 80s, 82, 83 when this record came out. So it was really a formative time for me to really expand my ears and my technique, because the guys I was listening to prior to that were a little more kind of, straight ahead rock guys, pentatonic based, and guys I love like David Gilmour. And then Yngwie came out and I was like, what is this? This is totally crazy. And I took to him much more than I did Eddie, just as a player. Yngwie's music, that kind of darker European sounding stuff, coming from loving the Scorpions and Sabbath and Zeppelin, that was an easy move for me. So, number 1 most influential guitar record of the 1980s, Yngwie Malmsteen's Rising Force. Tons of imitators followed. In my mind, he is the first full-on shredder where the technique that everybody had went through the roof. Well, I hope you enjoyed this list. I hope you had a lot of fun with it. Like I said, these are my opinions. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and be cool. This is all just fun. Of course, there's people I've left off. There's millions. Warren DeMartini, Rat Out of the Cellar, absolutely huge record for me. I just love that guitar playing. But these are all, the records I mentioned are all ones that I can come back to and keep on listening to. John Scofield, a bunch of records from them. Pickett's Live, Still Warm, Blue Matter, all those things. Man, there's so many records. There's the Gary Moore records that I loved. There's the Whitesnake records. There's a million of them that I'm leaving out. But I'm talking about the records that I can still put on and really enjoy, and ones that I think fully still exist in my guitar playing. Thanks for checking this out. If you want to help me out on my channel, you can go to jeffmcerlain.com at the links below. You can order any of my TrueFire courses or my course with Brett Papa. I also have some merchandise below, and if you can check out my link down below for Bandcamp, I've got my 2 records, one with Robin Ford, the other one by myself. The other stuff on there is background tracks that you can jam along to. So please check them out and help out the channel, and I will see you the next time.